I'm here at Linaro Connect in Hong Kong, and I'm with Jesse Parker. Jesse, you're actually with ARM, but you work for Linaro, and you're the graphics tech lead, correct?
Yes, that's right.
And so, last time we talked a little bit about the graphics side of things, but this morning you gave a plenary talk. You kicked off day 4 to talk about the upstreaming process and the lessons learned. Can you have a continuation from that talk this morning and sort of talk about, in a more condensed version of that talk, those lessons that were learned? Because you had some pretty good points in there.
Sure, and one of the things that I tried to do in structuring that talk was really keep those points pretty simple, and obviously in that scenario I elaborated a bit more, but the simple thing is once you've identified a target for a piece of work, a project that you want to contribute to, for example, the first thing to do is just introduce yourself and make sure that the community understands what you're trying to do and why, and why it's a benefit to their project. And you can easily at that point, if they don't see a vision that you do, they can kind of cut you off there before you get too far down the path, and really kind of understand, once you engage with them, understand what their process is and how to contribute in a way that's conducive with that, and to make sure that their developer community is comfortable reviewing what you've done, and that it doesn't sort of put any undue strain on their process to make sure your stuff gets merged in at some point, and in general just kind of be cognizant that they're busy doing core project development, and that what you're doing may or may not be a significant priority for them. So sort of be patient, but be kind of just be professional and polite when you kind of reprod them and say, hey, have you looked at that yet, and that sort of thing. And in general, that those things there have really led to a lot of really positive reaction from us, from the various communities that we've interacted with.
Well, I noticed that when you were giving your talk, and when people, especially the developers here, and for good reason, I'm not going to be snarky too much in my next question. When you say upstream, really that's synonymous with the kernel, Linux kernel upstream. And so you had mentioned what I thought was pretty funny and pretty kind of stereotypical what people think of when they think of the upstream kernel community, about those developers beating up on the new kids on the block. And I know it's tongue in cheek, and I know it was meant to be that way, and that people are, generally the upstream community is some pretty awesome folks. And so how do you see breaking away from that stereotype a little bit?
Well, yeah, and so that comment is sort of twofold from my perspective. One is that, yes, most people, when they think upstream, they are talking about the kernel. That isn't always true. Or, if you want to kind of break it down a little bit, for graphics work, for example, traditionally speaking, a lot of our work might have gone into a particular kernel subsystem that supports the GPU and that sort of thing. And so for us, that's sort of more the upstream per se than Linus's tree, because we know that anything that goes into the DRM tree, for example, will ultimately make it up there. But to your point, it was a little snarky. Part of it was meant to convey that it's not just the beginner that runs into this, right? The anecdote that I referred to of the issue that happened on the Linux kernel mailing list a couple months ago was to a very, very prominent developer and an ARM contributor. And if it can happen to him, it can happen to anybody, and that was really the gist there. But to break that, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I had a follow-up discussion with somebody else right after that they were a little maybe dismayed that that's really the way that it is. And but I think at the end of the day that the open source environment in general is kind of a code-based meritocracy, and if you show up with a good piece of code that that fits in with everything else that project is doing, people are pretty accepting of what it is that you're doing, and they'll realize that as you kind of prove yourself over a series of iterations that everything's really okay. And
when I first started looking at this and seeing some people that I've known for years be involved in the development world since the early 90s, and realizing that while it might be tough to kind of go through some of that, they actually look back at that as almost a rite of passage.
That's exactly how I've seen it, and they look forward to basically propagating that in a way. Now, hopefully, later generations do it non-maliciously, and they realize that that if they're sort of too accepting, that people will start to throw things at the project that really don't fit or aren't quite right, and they're just trying to reinforce the kind of behavior that they want to go on, in the long run, and I certainly get that.
And I do too. Now, I mean, and it was a slow process for me to kind of see that a little bit, but I also think that as you like you said, you can't inundate everybody because they're busy. And if you're throwing everything against the wall to see what sticks, that frustrates everybody.
Yeah.
And so you have to like you said, focus. Pick what you're going to do. Learn your environment. Learn the landscape. Don't just come in and go, I had this sucky experience, and what are you going to do about it? It's kind of blend in and be part of it. Because what I realized, while I gave this talk one time, and I said, being an open source, sometimes you have to have sunscreen, sometimes you have to have moleskin, and sometimes you have to have full body armor. Sometimes it's just protecting us against the rays. Sometimes it's some friction points that get a little tender, and sometimes it's a full-on assault. But at the end of it, when you come through it, it feels like a rite of passage, and you just learned so much out of it without being malicious, and I have a different opinion now than I had 4 years ago when I saw this stuff happening. And your talk today sort of kind of reinforced the opinion that I have, and that it's okay and it's good and it serves a purpose. Yeah,
and I'm glad for that. I agree with you. I think that I had a lot. I questioned it a lot more when I first started engaging, and I still would rather things be. It's fine for people to be kind of stern and to assert, project goals and what the priorities are, and in particular, I understand it. Certainly from the perspective of the maintainer, they have a lot of work to do to keep their code base sane, because they've got somebody. Unless you're in Linus, then somebody is upstream of you by some definition and needs to pull your code and make sense out of it, and you're just sort of propagating that headache otherwise. And so I totally get that, but I hope that sort of that rite of passage is firm but positive, rather than as you say, malicious. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we don't want that. But yeah, I think it needs to be that positive experience that causes somebody to go through it and be motivated and excited enough to guide somebody else through that process, and not because I was at one community talk, I think 2 years ago at a Linux Fest in South Carolina. I think it was the Southeast Linux Fest, and one person really walked away from the open source community because of their experience on the kernel mailing list. And I don't think we want that to happen, but at the same time, we want people to understand the seriousness of what they're doing too, and how it just doesn't affect their the area they're looking at. It affects millions of users across areas they never even thought about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you have to see that big picture, and like you said, to keep it sane, somebody has to be stern, somebody has to be. Yeah, I can quote some of the mailing list things, but yeah, somebody has to be that person, and that's okay. And I think you did an excellent job with your talk this morning, really reiterating that meritocracy, and how you have to do that. How you have to play nice in the sandbox.
Right.
You can't walk into somebody else's sandbox and say, "This sucks. I want you to change it." I don't know. Have you seen people do? I'm sure you've seen people do that over the years, right?
Yeah, I'm sure people that are overly convinced of their cleverness have tried to step in and do that in various communities. And
you say that so much nicer than I would.
Well, there's a certain amount of sort of, as Dave Rustling likes to call it, social engineering and sort of politics and that sort of thing involved, and so you kind of get a little bit more fluent in that once you kind of spend some time in a variety of communities, especially because everybody is after the same thing, but it's done a little bit differently in each project, for example.
Mm-hmm. What do you hope? I know what I took away from your talk, but that it's not about what I took away. What do you hope, as we wind down, what do you hope people took away from your talk today? What was your takeaway, if you had to sum it up in a sentence or two?
ultimately, I hope that it helped the developers in the audience make sense out of what they go through on a day-to-day basis, engaging with whatever project it is, whether it's the kernel or, or some other, some, like say Mozilla or something like that. That shouldn't matter. I mean, it's something that if it allows them to make a little bit more sense out of what they're going through, and see the light at the end of the tunnel, then I think it was good.
Well, Jesse, thank you so much for giving your talk this morning. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule here at Connect in Hong Kong to talk to me today. And I look forward to seeing what we talk about coming up at the next Connect.
Thanks, Amber. It was good talking to you again, too.
Thank you.